I am Chris Doucette. I am the Director of Community Engagement for CaringKind, and we do these live streams every week, every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in New York City. Today is Wednesday, November 11th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time in beautiful New York City. It's a little overcast today, so not the most beautiful day. Fall in New York City is the best time to be in New York City, in my humble opinion. And this weekend we had the absolute 10 out of 10 weekend, because Saturday and Sunday were both absolutely incredible weekend days. If you are in New York City and you were outside today, you were outside this weekend, I hope you had a good weekend. So again, welcome to CaringKind Live. This is CaringKind's weekly live stream. We're broadcasting to you live across our two social media channels, which are YouTube and Facebook. This is a live broadcast. So if you are interested in interacting with me or my guests today, you can do that by simply making a comment. Put a comment into your Facebook, in the Facebook comment to this window, or if you're on YouTube, then just write a comment to the YouTube channel, and there's a comment field just under that video, and you can ask a question, make a comment, tell me how handsome I am, whatever you want to do, you can do that. This is your opportunity as one of CaringKind's stakeholders and someone who's interested in Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. This is your chance to interact with the people who are actually doing the work every day to support Alzheimer's caregivers. So on today's show, we have a great interview with some folks from the Taub Institute for research on Alzheimer's disease and the aging brain. You'll notice I had to look off screen for that because one of their first tests of memory disorders is if you can remember the entire name. It's a mouthful. So, but we've got three women on the live stream today who work at the Taub Institute, who are going to be giving you kind of the latest and greatest research on what's happening with Alzheimer's research and the aging brain. And because there is so much information that we're going to give you today, I'm going to keep this introduction pretty brief. And that is to say that I'm going to dispense with the CaringKind updates because we want to focus today on the latest research from the Taub Institute. I will say, after taking a couple weeks off for after the walk, I want to thank everyone who participated in the walk this year. We are quickly approaching over $450,000 in revenue raised for Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. So thank you very much. Hat is off to all of you, whether you're a walker, fundraiser, sponsor, partner, volunteer, or staff. Thank you so much for your participation. It is now November 11th. Happy Veterans Day, everyone. And we are launching our year-end campaign. So between now and December 31st, it is year-end holiday giving. So when you think about your charity of choice or charities of choice for your year-end giving, I hope that you consider CaringKind. We will be launching our year-end campaign website next week. But of course, you can always donate anytime you want. Okay, so without further ado, let me check out this comment here. Oh, Mary Robertson has tuned in, and she said, "Bravo on the fundraising. Thank you. I did it all by myself with the help of thousands of other people." So thank you, Mary, and thank you, everyone. And before we bring on my guest today, I just want to do another shout out for social media. You know, CaringKind is a nonprofit organization. We don't have millions of dollars to spend on marketing and billboards and television ads. So please, one thing you can do is help us amplify our message through social media. It's free for you, and you can really help get our message into the hands of people who need it best. So if you like this video, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel or our CaringKind Facebook page, please do so. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and all of those sites and platforms can be found where? That's right, in the show description of this video. So click on that see more or show description and expand those. I do it every time. Expand that list of social media platforms, and you can get connected to us and help us amplify our message to get our message into the hands of people who need it most. And that is, of course, families affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. Okay, so that's enough of my spiel. Let's get right into it. I want to welcome the folks from the Taub Institute, and I hope I said that right. I should have asked. Taub Institute for Research on Alzheimer's Disease and the Aging Brain. So please, I'm going to try and do this in order since I've not had 3 people on the live stream before. So this is a first. So here we go with, first we're going to start with Hannah Silverman and go to Corinne Sejourné and then Jeannie Ake. And I'm hidden. I'm hidden. Let's see. Let me get rid of this banner. Hi, guys.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, thank you for having us.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. There we go. That looks great. Look how good we look. That's amazing. Thank you, guys. So in the first question, did I get that right? Is it Taub?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
That's what I thought. Okay, I'm not too far off. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the live stream, and thank you for being a partner with CaringKind. You've been a partner with us for years, and in the work that you do and the work that we do, and we always meet up every year at the walk. So thank you guys so much for your participation.
Yeah, we're happy to be a partner.
Yeah. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just do a round of introductions? If you could just starting with you, Hannah, and introduce yourself. So Hannah, Corinne, and Jeannie, introduce yourselves, and then we can go right into the presentation.
Yeah, so my name is Hannah Silverman, and I've been working as a research coordinator at the Taub Institute for about 4 years, so I have finally memorized the full name.
I know, it's a lot.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Corinne. I also have been working at the Taub Institute as a research coordinator, and I've been here for about 1.5 years now.
And my name's and I'm also a research coordinator at the Taub Institute and have been here for about 1 year as well.
Terrific. So, and why don't you give people an outline really quickly about what the next 30 minutes or so are going to look like?
Sure. So we are here today to share a little bit more information about neuropsychiatric symptoms in Alzheimer's disease. So these are symptoms that are related to emotion and behavior and mood, which is something we're also doing some research on. So we'll tell you a little bit more about what those symptoms can look like, share some tips for management, and then also tell you about the research that we're doing right now on those types of things.
Terrific. And is Jeannie going to start?
I'm going to start, and then I'll hand it off to Jeannie.
Perfect. All right. So why don't I see if I can pull up your presentation, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right. Here we go. We did practice this, folks who are watching this, and so it should go okay. But you know me, I'm always pressing the wrong buttons. How does that look, guys?
That looks good.
That looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at us. See, this is why rehearsal matters. All right. Well then, Corinne, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So just to introduce, I know I kind of just mentioned it with Chris, but this presentation will be looking at neuropsychiatric symptoms in Alzheimer's disease. And specifically, we'll be talking about recognition of these symptoms in patients, management of the symptoms in patients, and then caregiver support and research related to these symptoms. So now I'll go ahead and hand it off to Jeannie.
Okay, so we'll first start with an overview of our terms so that we have a clear foundation before moving forward with the rest of the talk. And I'll briefly define dementia and Alzheimer's disease here, as these terms are often used interchangeably, but there are some important differences to understand. So dementia is actually a syndrome and not a specific disease, and it's a decline in mental ability that's severe enough to cause trouble with someone's independence and their daily living. And Alzheimer's disease is actually the most common cause or the most common type of dementia. It has an insidious onset, and that means that the symptoms come on slowly rather than all at once. And it's also characterized by a progressive decline. So that means that we expect someone with Alzheimer's disease to gradually get worse over time in their memory and other cognitive abilities. It's also common for people with the disease to experience neuropsychiatric symptoms. Next slide. So looking at this graphic, we can see that dementia is really this overarching term that catches several different types of diseases that deal with cognitive decline. Alzheimer's disease is the most common, but you can see that diseases like vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, and several others are also causes of dementia. But of course, in this talk today, we'll be focusing on Alzheimer's disease and in particular, its neuropsychiatric symptoms.
So what are neuropsychiatric symptoms? These are non-cognitive disturbances. So that means these are things that aren't specifically related to thinking, that can affect mood and behavior, but that develop alongside changes in thinking in diseases like Alzheimer's. So they develop and change over time. And like Jeannie mentioned, the course of this illness can be slow, and these will follow those changes. So we'll talk through 5 different categories of neuropsychiatric symptoms in the talk today. Those include depression and apathy, anxiety and agitation, delusions and hallucinations, aggression, and insomnia. And for each of these sections, we'll be defining what the symptoms are, providing some examples of what this can look like in real life, and then also talking about how to manage these symptoms. There's some tips that can sometimes be helpful.
We love tips. Okay.
So the first 2 neuropsychiatric symptoms that we'll discuss are depression and apathy. And these are 2 that we've grouped together here because they often overlap and can potentially present very similarly. Depression is an ongoing lowered or sad mood that can interfere with a person's daily life. And in addition to sadness, people with depression might also experience feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and excessive guilt. And in Alzheimer's disease, this is something that can show up early in the disease course, and that it may even be a response to a person's own awareness of their decline. Apathy is a loss of initiative and motivation, and it's very common in Alzheimer's disease and is likely to continue or persist as the disease progresses. People with apathy might be less likely to engage in conversation and less interested in their usual activities and potentially more socially withdrawn. There are several ways to support someone experiencing these symptoms, and in this talk we'll be focusing on specifically non-pharmacological types of management. So for example, following a predictable routine and schedule can be quite helpful for a person experiencing depression and apathy. And in particular, it's useful to incorporate exercise into that routine and focus on activity and movement that the person finds enjoyable. They look forward to that routine every day. It's also important to find opportunities for contribution and recognition and identify ways that someone can be helpful around the house or maybe a particular chore that's accessible to them. And this offers the person the opportunity to feel a sense of achievement, and it also gives you as the caregiver the opportunity to validate their contribution. And people with Alzheimer's disease are, of course, people who have been contributing significantly to their communities and to their households for many decades. So it can be quite hard and saddening for that person to begin to see themselves as a burden. So verbally affirming love, respect, and appreciation can really go a long way to alleviate some of these feelings of depression and apathy. Next slide. So the next 2 neuropsychiatric symptoms of Alzheimer's disease that we'll discuss are anxiety and agitation. And again, these are grouped together here because, like depression and apathy, their presentation can also be quite overlapping. Anxiety is an ongoing worry or fear that something bad is going to happen, even when there's no apparent reason for that person to be anxious. And similar to depression, anxiety can be something that we'll see earlier in the disease course, but it's not as commonly seen as something like apathy. Someone with anxiety might frequently need reassurance or get increasingly nervous when they're away from their caregiver. You might also notice that the person is complaining of physical symptoms like a racing or skipping heartbeat, and you might also notice that they're verbally or visibly shaky. And agitation is a restlessness and uneasiness. This can sometimes lead to more aggressive behaviors, but this is not as common. But what we do expect with agitation is that the level of agitation will increase as the disease progresses. And when someone is experiencing agitation, you might notice that they're pacing and fidgeting and just generally seeming very tense and very on edge. And so to support someone experiencing these symptoms, you can try to simplify routines and maintain a calm environment as much as possible. It can be really helpful to try to identify sources of stimulation that the person finds especially distressing, and then try to limit those as much as possible. And activities like a gentle hand massage or incorporating relaxing music into their routine can be especially grounding and help to distract the person from their anxieties and their agitated state. It's also important here to offer consistent reassurance and emphasize the person's safety to help manage some of that anxiety and agitation.
Great.
And next slide.
Okay, and so delusions and hallucinations, these can sometimes be a little bit confusing to differentiate. They both have to do with beliefs that do not necessarily relate to what others are experiencing. Delusions are bigger picture. So these are happening when a person has beliefs that are not real, whereas hallucinations are sensory and can be more specific. So these happen when a person senses something that is not real. So that could be smell, sight, or taste, or hearing. So an example of a delusion for that bigger picture kind of concept is perhaps an unreasonable belief or suspicion, like the idea that someone might be stealing or trying to steal from perhaps a patient with Alzheimer's disease. So that can come up and is somewhat frequent, happens in about 1 to 4 cases, sometimes 1 to 3 with Alzheimer's disease, according to estimates. And then same with hallucinations, similar prevalence estimate. And that example would be perhaps seeing an image that someone else with them does not see, or hearing, smelling, or feeling something that is not there.
Mm-hmm.
So these can be particularly distressing to experience, both for a caregiver and for the patient with Alzheimer's disease who is experiencing a delusion or hallucination. So you'll notice that some of the management points start to repeat, that some of the things that Jeannie brought up are also really relevant and helpful here. One thing that can be particularly helpful to keep in mind is the 3 R's concept. So that R's stand for reassure, respond, and then refocus. So reassurance can look like speaking, so using calm words, using gentle touch, and then responding, important here to really listen to what the person is describing and hear what they're saying, acknowledge that you've heard them, and then perhaps say that you are not seeing the same thing. So it could be as simple as saying, I know that you see something there, but I don't see it. So important to really respond and acknowledge the experience. And then refocus. So perhaps bring the patient to a different room, make the lighting a little bit brighter, do an activity that you both enjoy together, maybe looking at old photos, going for a walk, listening to music. So again, kind of that refocus to move away from the delusion or hallucination. And going back to that environment concept, sometimes what might seem like a hallucination or delusion could just be someone mistaking something for someone else, something for something else. So it can be helpful to really make sure that you have the lighting that allows people whose sight might be declining, allows them to really be able to see what's going on in the room, for example. So we can go ahead to the next slide.
As I go to the next slide, that brings up a good question, and well, I think it's a good question. Maybe it's not, but how, if someone is having a bit of a hallucination with regard to pain, because pain is such an unknowable thing, is it actual pain that they're experiencing, or is it a hallucination of pain that they're experiencing?
That's a great question that I don't necessarily have the best answer to. I think that would be something that's really helpful to talk to a provider about. So trying to determine when the pain might be arising. And then also, again, always that response portion is really helpful. So making sure that the patient feels validated in their experience.
Yeah.
And then talking to a provider about when is that pain happening? What does that look like? Could there be causes that might be manageable, might not be manageable? And so thinking kind of bigger picture about how to manage that.
And certainly acknowledging pain is super important, even for people with Alzheimer's disease. Even as long as someone's paying attention to you, that alleviates half of the anxiety, right?
Definitely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, for all of us, important to feel heard.
Yeah.
Okay, so aggression is another particularly upsetting symptom that can arise in Alzheimer's disease and is considered a neuropsychiatric symptom that can progress with the course of the illness. So here as well, at the beginning of Alzheimer's disease in the onset stages, it often is much more mild or is not even present at all, but this can worsen over time as other symptoms worsen. And prevalence in the population is estimated to be about 15 to 20% of patients experiencing this, so a little bit less than hallucinations and delusions, but still a significant amount. And the definition of this behavior is that it's behavior specifically aimed or seeming to be aimed at harming others physically or verbally. So as far as what that looks like, the verbal aggression could be swearing, screaming, shouting, making threats. And then the physical aggression could be hitting, pinching, scratching, hair pulling, biting, throwing things. So this can be very upsetting, particularly for a caregiver who maybe never experienced this with a person experiencing Alzheimer's before. It can be a really dramatic change from normal or their usual. So again, the management comes back to kind of your response, and staying calm is important. Do consider checking on possible causes of discomfort. So are physical needs being met, social needs, psychological needs? Sometimes what that looks like is, again, like maybe there's too much noise. So there's a sense of overwhelm, but that could be alleviated just by quieting the room. Maybe it's more of a psychological overwhelm, too many people, too many different things going on. So thinking about what could be kind of leading to that aggression. And then in these cases particularly, take a breath and get space if it's helpful. So it's okay to walk away, give some time for the aggression behaviors to settle. And then again, listen and communicate, focused on feeling. So explaining both how you're feeling, what you're noticing perhaps that they're feeling. And it can be very helpful to maintain eye contact in those conversations to ground both of you towards the conversation itself. And refocusing attention can of course be helpful here too. So once the person is calm enough to consider and to hear you, can be helpful to redirect the activity, go do something else that is pleasant for both of you. But one particular thing I do want to note here is that if you feel your safety is threatened or the safety of someone else is threatened, it's important to call 911 in the case of an emergency and seek help as you need. Okay, we can go ahead to the next slide. All right, and so our last neuropsychiatric symptom to talk about here is insomnia. And within this broader category, we also wanted to talk briefly about some of the different behavioral occurrences that can happen in Alzheimer's disease. So insomnia specifically refers to difficulty in initiating or maintaining restorative sleep. And then in Alzheimer's disease, there's also a concept known as sundowning, which refers to changes in behavior that occur at dusk. So behavior might seem somewhat normal during the day, but then there might be this agitation, aggression, anxiety that shows up in the evening hours. And so the estimates here for Alzheimer's disease patients experiencing insomnia or related sleep changes is about 20 to 30%. So again, that puts us at that 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 range. And the examples are pretty clear cut. So that kind of just change in what is typical for sleep and changes what is typical for evening behaviors. The management here, it's very helpful to focus on a routine. So particularly trying to think about what are the waking hours, what are the nighttime hours? Can the waking hours involve a lot of bright light? So can there be bright light inside? Can you spend more time outdoors during the daytime? Exercising during the daytime can be helpful. Reducing caffeine intake during the day can also be helpful. And then in the evening, can you keep the lights kind of bright and that daytime waking activity until it's about time for bed? So there's a real transition that way, and just kind of incorporates that consistent routine that can be helpful for both a caregiver and for a patient with Alzheimer's disease. All right, we can go ahead to the next slide.
Okay, and before we do, Rosemarie Bruno had a question. This is a wonderful presentation. And will we be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint? What do you think, guys?
Definitely.
Okay, we'll make that. So Rosemarie and to everyone watching, we will make this PowerPoint in the form of a PDF available as a link in the show description after we complete this this live stream right now. So check back later, and the link should be there. I may also email it to the group to the folks. So if you received an email from me just this morning about promoting this conversation, you should get an email from me about that as well. So thank you, Rosemarie. And another comment, Joan Faust says, always keep a candy that looks like a pill. So if there is a complaint of pain, you can start with letting the patient take it. What do you think about that? I'm not sure I understand it.
Oh, so that they feel that there's something that is offered to help them.
Oh, right, almost
Yeah,
like
that's a good
placebo.
idea.
Yeah.
And one other thing, just speaking about pain, sometimes it's a communication issue too, that people might not fully understand some of the sensations that they're having. So for instance, if someone has a sunburn, they might not understand what the source is of the discomfort that they're feeling. So it goes back to what Corinne was saying, just try to be aware of sources of discomfort that the person with dementia might not be able to identify or articulate on their own.
Yeah. And again, reassure and refocus, and kind of making people think that you're taking action on their pain to alleviate it is part of that process. Yeah, good idea. Thanks, Joan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on. Next slide, caregiver coping and support.
Okay, so we wanted to just give kind of an overview of, beyond just the specific management of symptoms, what can be helpful for caregivers. And what can be helpful to keep in mind as you're encountering these situations and changes that can be quite distressing and can be upsetting. So first, we wanted to just say that it's important to remember that you're not alone in this experience. Chris was telling us about a great podcast series that CaringKind has put on. It can be helpful to really intentionally seek out others' stories and hear about the experiences of others. And then beyond that, it can be very helpful to connect with others in the community who are experiencing a similar disease progression, a similar burden, especially since the burden is often on one person or a small group. It can be very helpful to connect with others who are experiencing the same thing. So important to kind of keep that in mind. The second point is seek professional help. So this goes to even what I mentioned earlier with pain. It's important to find a clinician that you trust for managing as the disease progresses. There are different medications that are helpful, and a clinician you trust, both on the psychiatry side and in the neurology side, can be quite helpful for managing the progression of Alzheimer's disease, especially with neuropsychiatric symptoms. And additionally, professional help in the form of a home health aide can be very useful, especially for some of these symptoms like agitation and aggression. Often, caregivers find that with a home health aide, the patient might be a little bit calmer or less likely to demonstrate that agitated or aggressive behavior that they might demonstrate with the caregiver that they know very well. So instituting regular time with the home health aide or increasing the time as symptoms potentially worsen can be very useful for caregivers. The third point on here is keep a behavior log. So this, I think, also could be useful for the pain question. But in general, with all of these different symptoms, it can be very helpful when they come up, and maybe it's in the moments afterwards when things are calm again. It can be helpful to write down exactly what happened, think about when it happened, and then also think about what happened beforehand. So was there anything in the environment or in the interactions that might have triggered any of these neuropsychiatric symptoms to arise? And then over time, recognizing patterns yourself and bringing these to your provider can be very helpful. Okay, and then the fourth point is setting reasonable boundaries and expectations. So this goes to just the caregivers, thinking about how expectations inherently will need to be adjusted as you are caring for someone with this progressive disease. And it can really change the structure of your life. So the changes that are happening in your loved one or the person that you're caring for can really affect the way that you also are able to manage your own routine and your own schedules. So it's important to give yourself the permission to step back from things that are causing stress, and then also ask for help. So whether that's a home health aide or a friend or someone else who can step in, so that you also not only have to step back from things, but can also step into the things that bring you joy and can continue to participate in activities that alleviate stress or that allow your life to feel full. 5 is take advantage of resources. So there's many fantastic organizations out there, much like CaringKind, and we'll show a slide of some of those in a couple of minutes. But they offer support groups, information, and much more. So great to take the time to look into those when you have a few minutes. And last, just be gentle with yourself. So caregiving is very challenging. Having a loved one with AD or with Alzheimer's disease can present a very unique kind of loss. So recognizing that you might have lots of changing emotions and feelings, and then also recognizing that it's okay. So having different feelings, having different emotions, and going through this experience is normal, and do carve out the time you need to care for yourself. So next slide, I'll pass it over to Jeannie.
So we also want to recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the usual challenges and stresses of caregiving, and it's also posed a lot of unique challenges of its own. And there's a very real concern right now of oneself or your loved one with Alzheimer's disease contracting COVID. And on top of that, there's also a lot of restricted activity and social interaction, and you might find that a lot of the in-home services that you typically rely on have currently paused. Of course, there's also a lot of economic strain as people deal with job loss and the burden of balancing caregiving and potentially working from home simultaneously. There's also an increased guilt of asking for outside help, because when you bring someone into your home, of course, that exposes you and your loved one with Alzheimer's disease and potentially exposes this person coming in as well. There's also a great pressure to ensure that you and your loved one are following public safety measures, and these are often developing and can be confusing and difficult to keep up with. So in response to some of these challenges, it can alleviate a lot of stress to develop plans in advance to address your specific anxieties. So for instance, if you're very worried about what will happen to your loved one with Alzheimer's disease if you become ill, it can be really helpful to contact your support network and develop a plan in advance and identify someone who can step in and help take care of your loved one while you're recovering. And while it's very important that we all practice social distancing, we don't want to socially isolate ourselves. So like Corinne was mentioning, it's really important to have a support network, both socially, privately, and in your professional sphere with healthcare providers, with home health aides, and with social workers and things like that. And not all of us have family or friends that are willing or can help take care of someone with Alzheimer's disease. But again, that's where healthcare providers and support groups can really be helpful to help navigate some of those challenges and provide some concrete support and advice. And it's also really important that both the caregiver and the person with Alzheimer's disease maintains their routine as much as possible. So that requires thinking creatively right now, because again, a lot of our usual activities are limited and restricted. But luckily, there's many organizations and sites offering virtual alternatives to their usual in-person activities. So for instance, if you typically attend your support group in person, there's several support groups being offered online right now. You can attend telehealth video visits instead of your usual in-person doctor's visits. And there's lots of arts and cultural initiatives going on right now that are being done over a video platform instead of the usual in-person. So it's also very important to stay up to date with CDC guidelines and prepare yourself to offer extra verbal and written reminders to your loved one with Alzheimer's disease. It's also important to prepare yourself for the possibility that some of these neuropsychiatric symptoms may become worse and more severe as we approach winter and COVID cases potentially rise. As we start to see more restrictions, we might notice some potentially elevated feelings of anxiety and agitation in our loved ones. So it can be really helpful to reach out to the person's doctor right away and have those conversations with them about how best to navigate those challenges and those conversations so that you're not left to carry that burden entirely on your own. Next. And we also want to take a moment to highlight several organizations and sites that provide a lot of wonderful resources to caregivers and people with dementia. So like CaringKind, of course, they have a lot of really great resources for people. And also AARP, the Arts and Minds organization, the Alzheimer's Association, and the Family Caregiver Alliance are all places where you can find lots of opportunities for online support, virtual activities, and useful information guides to help navigate a lot of these stressors and concerns that we've mentioned today. And then I'll pass it on to Hannah to talk about some of our research at the Taub Institute.
Thanks, Jeannie. So we've been telling you a lot about the definitions of these symptoms and some of the management tips, but I also want to share about the research that's going on within our department here at Columbia that focuses specifically on these neuropsychiatric symptoms. And before I start, I want to define a couple of terms that I'm going to use. So research can often be categorized in one of two ways. The first is observational research. And the goal of observational research is really to better understand the disease or its progression. And then we also have clinical research, which is focused more on intervening to treat some aspect of the disease. And I'm going to tell you about 3 different studies that we have, both observational and clinical. So you can move to the next slide. So the first research study is called Neurodegeneration-Associated Psychiatric Syndromes, or NAPS. And the goal of this study is really to better understand these symptoms. So we often speak about them in very broad terms, but we really want to better understand the scope and the nuance of these symptoms, what they look like, how often they're occurring, and which ones are the most troublesome for patients and for families in Alzheimer's disease and also in other dementias. And the other goal of this study is to identify associations between these symptoms and changes in the brain. So we have a lot of imaging techniques that we can use to really identify which regions or networks within the brain are being affected by neurodegenerative processes. And we want to better understand whether disruption of particular regions or networks is associated with the presentation or onset of specific types of neuropsychiatric symptoms. Next slide. I also want to tell you a little bit about what it would look like to be involved in a research study like this. So patients that we are currently enrolling will participate in a study visit that is one time and that lasts for about 3 to 4 hours. And that visit can occur either in person or virtually at this time. And what it involves is a lot of questionnaires asking about these kinds of changes. So have you been feeling down or depressed in the last 2 weeks? And how often have you been feeling angry? Have you been less interested in doing the activities that you usually do? And so we'll ask these questions of the patient and also of a study partner who typically is the caregiver, spouse, or a close family member or friend. And we also will conduct some interviews with the study coordinator and the physician, and we'll be asking similar questions. The second component of the study would be to come in person for an MRI scan at the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Next slide. So the next research study that I'll tell you about is called Positive and Negative Valence Emotional Systems, or PAVES. And this study is really designed to build on the NAPS study. So everyone who's enrolled in the PAVES study will have also completed the NAPS study. And the goals of this are, well, we've gotten a lot of information on these symptoms in different patient groups through the NAPS study, but it's all based on self-report or caregiver reports, so it's very subjective. And we want to further understand these symptoms by really looking at how people's emotional processing is working in more real-world scenarios. And so the idea is to elicit a real range of emotions using various tasks over the course of the research visit. On site, and to use the information, physiological measurements, and report from these experiences during these tasks to further understand how emotional processing may be disrupted or altered in people with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And because all of these people will already have completed an MRI scan, we're again interested in the associations between disruption in particular brain regions and networks and disruption of these emotional processing systems. Next slide. And so involvement in the PAVES study looks a little bit different from involvement in the NAPS study. It also entails a one-time visit lasting for about 4 hours, but instead of questionnaires, people will be engaging in different in-person tasks. And so these tasks include completing some computer-based games, placing your hand in cold water, approaching a live spider, and experiencing a mild electrical shock. And I do want to be clear that the goal of the study, while it's designed to elicit a range of emotions, both good and bad, we really do want it to be an overall positive experience And so it is certainly acceptable for people to choose to participate in the study, but not to participate in certain tasks. And that's a decision that can be made in advance or even at the time of the visit, that we really are administering these with care and sensitivity and prioritizing everybody's well-being at all times during the visit. Next slide. And then there's also a clinical trial that's going on at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, which is just around the corner from the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And the goal of this study is to examine the efficacy and safety of a medication in combination with a psychosocial intervention to treat specifically agitation in people with Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. And so the involvement for this study would be a little bit more intensive. It involves coming in for several in-person visits and also completing additional study measures by phone. And the study would last for about 12 weeks. Next slide. So if anyone here is interested in finding out more or potentially getting involved in one of these research studies or in other research that's going on at Columbia, you can use the contact information to reach us, which is on this page. And as Chris mentioned, the YouTube, this video will be uploaded to YouTube, and also the slides will be sent out. So if you don't have time to write this down right now, don't worry, just look back. And you can go to the next slide. So also, if you have any questions or comments about this presentation and you don't have the chance to ask during the live stream, please feel free to reach out to us. This is our research team email, so we'll all receive the email communication, and we're more than happy to engage in conversation or to answer any questions that come up as you think about the material in this video. And that's it. That's our presentation. So I really want to thank you, Chris, for helping to coordinate this. This was a lot of fun for us and really a great opportunity. And we're so glad to get to share some of the information that we work on.
Absolutely. You're so welcome. And thank you for being here and for the great presentation, the great information. I know that historically, you know, some people have already asked questions. We're done with that. But as people watch this video over the next couple of days, as we promote it, that's when you may receive some questions via your email address, with columbia.edu email address. Do you have any other closing statements or any other observations you want to make before we wrap things up?
No.
No, you got it. So that's the whole point of a PowerPoint. You don't leave anything behind. So that's good. So that wraps up this week's live stream. I want to thank Hannah and Corinne and Jeannie. Thank you from the Taub Institute for being a part of this week's live stream. And we'll be in touch over the next couple of days.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Good luck with all your research. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And that was Hannah Silverman, Corinne Sejourné, and Jeannie Ake from the Taub Institute at Columbia University's Taub Institute for research on Alzheimer's disease and the aging brain. There you go. I remembered the whole thing, so I think I'm good. I think I'm good to go. And speaking of going, we've got to wrap things up. So I'd like to thank you for participating on this live stream. Please check back later for links on the show description. I will add this email address, Huey Research Team at columbia.edu. And I will also create a link so that you can access this PDF presentation directly as a PDF. You can just download it and you can save it for later. And of course, keep your eyes out for CaringKind's year-end appeal. It's the season of giving. So from now until December 31st, CaringKind is accepting year-end gifts in support of all of the work that we do, not just in research, but certainly to support Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can here you do have some questions. Let's see. Oh, Joan. Hi, thanks, Joan. Thanks. Thank you. It was informative. That's the team at Taub Institute, right? And Mary, glad that you liked the information. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I am Chris Doucette. If you have any questions, feel free to give me send me an email, cdoucette@cknyc.org. From everyone here at CaringKind, thank you so much for being a part of this community, and we will see you next Wednesday at 1 o'clock.